listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. This is Anthony Bita, Executive of ACICS. Welcome to the webinar, ACICS webinar today, a briefing on our recognition with the U.S. Department of Education. Welcome, and thanks for taking the time to exchange information with us and get into a little more detail about where we stand relative to our recognition with the Department of Education. Also joining me today to answer questions as necessary is Jeff Olszewski, Vice President of Finance for ACICS. The agenda today is the welcome. We'll talk a little bit about our recognition status and the timeline for resolving that recognition, which I'm sure everybody's very interested in. We'll talk about how our operations and services are continuing unabated through this process, and our commitment to continue to provide those services as usual to our member institutions. We'll talk a little bit about an overview of institutional activities, and then we'll also get into next steps, just so that you have some perspective on what's going to happen in the next month, what's going to happen in the next 6 months, what's going to happen maybe in the next 9 to 12 months. Just a few bullet points to emphasize. Number one, ACICS is recognized as a national accrediting agency by the U.S. Department of Education. That statement is true today. That's the key factor for folks to pay attention to. It's also the case that ACICS is in the middle of a lengthy re-recognition process that requires additional steps and additional time to resolve. We'll get into the timeline in a minute, but I wanted to make sure that everybody begins this webinar with a common understanding of those basic facts. Then you see, in terms of the recognition timeline, what are some of the key milestones and what are the intervals that are important both for the planning purposes of ACICS and our member institutions. So we know that a point of reference was back on June 23rd. There was a recommendation from the National Advisory Committee to the senior department official that recognition of ACICS be denied. That is one recommendation among other sources of information that the senior department official will take into account in making and rendering a decision. On July 5th, ACICS submitted to the a response to the advisory committee recommendation to the senior department official. That was within the allowed interval for amendments to the record, and that record was primarily derived from the NASIKI proceeding, but the record remained open until July 5th, and at that point ACICS did provide additional information to help inform the deliberations of the senior department official. Sometime in the next 90 days following the NASIKI meeting, the senior department official will encounter a deadline for issuing a decision letter. Will that happen in the next 30 days, the next 60 days, or will that interval go the full 90 days? We don't know at this point, and there's no point in speculating. Suffice to say, it could take as long as 90 days. If then at the next step, following a written notification of a decision from the senior department official, that's the SDO acronym that's embedded in this slide, if that decision is adverse, then ACICS has 10 days to notify the secretary of our intent to appeal that negative or adverse decision letter. Then we will have 30 days following the notification to file that actual appellate packet with the secretary and make the best case why the secretary should consider rendering a decision different than that which was received from the senior department official. Hopefully that will not be necessary, but until we have the senior department official letter, we don't know whether or not the filing an intent to appeal or actually filing the appellate package is necessary. Those are more prospective, and they depend on outcomes that we cannot predict at this point. And then finally, after we assume we have to and we do file the appeal to the Secretary, the Secretary of Education has the discretion to take as long or as little amount of time as he or she deems necessary to render a final decision based on the ACICS appeal. Those are all steps that put a final resolution of this matter into the future at some undetermined length of time. But each of those steps need to happen in order for us to have resolution, and we intend to pursue each of those steps as is appropriate and as is necessary, depending on what happens and when it happens. Let's talk a little bit about operations and services. It's important to point out that as part of our effort to remedy the perceived deficiencies that came from the Department of Education's analysis of the ACICS application for re-recognition, we have initiated and are continuing to push forward with implementing a series of reforms and activities and policies and procedures that will produce outcomes at the August Council meeting, produce outcomes in subsequent Council and accreditation cycles, and are important for demonstrating that we're able to comply with all the requirements of the department. Part of that were standards that were revised and made available to the membership back in May, and that became effective July 1st, 2016. If you have not had a chance to review that memo to the field or review the standards that became effective July 1st, 2016, you should do so even if you're not currently in the accreditation cycle, because they do have a material impact on the way we review and determine the quality of your programs and your institutions. Secondly, I want to mention that substantive and non-substantive change applications will continue to be processed through the duration of this entire process within the average time frame. We've made that commitment. We believe we have the resources in place to continue to do that. So you should also expect that that will be the ongoing level of service you can expect from ACICS. And then relative to accreditation visits, for those institutions, and we'll get into this in a little more detail a little bit later, that have expectations of an accreditation visit, either for an initial grant, for a renewal grant, or for a quality assurance monitoring visit, or for some other purpose, those visits are being arranged and scheduled according to our normal processes. Nothing has changed in that regard, nor do we anticipate any changes in that regard at this particular point in time. Next, I'd like to give you a little bit of an overview of institutional activities that I think are relevant and probably anticipate a lot of the questions that we may see after we're done with the slideshow. So it's important that that our institutions understand that for a variety of reasons that have to do with the independence of the states, a number of state approval authorities have requested that ACICS accredited institutions develop contingency plans for the continuation of their accreditation, and that they submit those plans to the state approval authority within some specified time frame. We've become aware of that secondhand, but we've also had outreach to the state approval authorities to verify that in fact they have made that request. And we just encourage that all those requests should be submitted in a timely manner to make sure that you maintain good standing with your state approval authorities. Another big area of demand for information is that relates to students. What do students know? What are they asking about? How can they be better informed about what the recognition status of ACICS means to them? And again, we believe that the department's website, with the link provided on the slide, what college accreditation changes mean for students, provides a fairly comprehensive and reasonable representation of considerations that students attending ACICS colleges and schools should be aware of. Does that mean that you likewise should be printing out that information and making it available to students? I think that's up to your discretion, but I do think as you get questions from students or you do your own outreach to students, I would start with this information resource from the department's website as a good starting point. I think that will probably answer the vast majority of their questions, and it's a fairly authoritative source of information. Now we're getting to the final section of our presentation before we begin answering and responding to questions. It's worthy to note that in the August 2000 Council cycle, that the Council will continue, as you would expect and as required, to review the reports from all initial renewal grants and other applications that were derived from visits in the May, June, and July 2016 accreditation cycle. That goes on business as usual. Secondly, there will be adoption of some additional reforms in policy and procedures that will be considered by the department, by the Council at its meeting in August. And the focus and emphasis of those additional reforms will be on those policy changes that are responsive to the findings of the department's staff analysts. Those are the priority, those are the focus, and we need to continue to push forward to demonstrate that we have addressed those concerns, we take them seriously, and this Council is willing to confront changes in policy and memorialize those changes in order to demonstrate compliance with the department's expectations. We will also be at the August Council meeting reviewing the effectiveness of reforms that were established and implemented this Council cycle. A lot of you probably, particularly those that have had full team visits either from initials or from renewal grants, know that we've added some additional methods of discernment. I'm not going to get into the list of those, and some additional requirements in terms of documentation, so that the level of evidence and the quality of the evidence that the Council is confronting in August to make informed accrediting decisions is as strong and as informative as possible. And the effectiveness of those reforms will also be discussed by the Council to see which of those seem to have the greatest benefit and which of those need to be further enhanced or revised as we go into the fall 2016 Council and accreditation cycle. So then that gets us through August, and then immediately the staff, member institutions, and the Council has to gear up to how we can build on the successes and the strengths that we accomplished in the August cycle to do even greater degree of scrutiny, review, and strengthening member institutions through the December 2016 Council cycle. What will those additional steps involve? The short list includes the need to review the 2016 CAR results, student achievement results, and for the Council to apply its revised compliance intervals to those programs and institutions that are operating below standard. Secondly, it will involve reviewing the results of data integrity tests that are applied to that student achievement data, so that the specific issue of whether or not the Council is holding institutions accountable for providing reliable information is being fulfilled at the level that is expected by the department. So that will involve some additional protocols, it will involve some additional testing, and the results of those tests if there are problems, will be conveyed back to the institution or the program that submitted that student achievement data. Further, there will be an integration and evaluation of at-risk programs into the accreditation review. So this involves enhancing risk factors such as those derived from complaints or other third-party reliable sources that then can be, in a methodical way, systematic way, taken into account by the Council in reaching accrediting decisions, be that a application for an initial grant, for a renewal grant, substantive changes, or other requests that are in front of the Council at that time. Those at-risk factors will be and are currently being integrated into that review. Then finally, integrating systematic outreach to our state licensure boards into the evaluation of programs. The expectation that we will have a standard, that we do have a standard for licensure and certification exam pass rates, and that we're applying that systematically and methodically to more than 600 programs that require certification or licensure at ACICS member institutions is an expectation we expect to fulfill within this time frame. But it means the collection of additional information, and it means the analysis of that information needs to be integrated into the Council's review of the sufficiency of student achievement by those programs at the established ACICS benchmark. Some additional next steps that apply to everyone. Again, if you are an institution whose grant of accreditation expires at the end of 2017, it is still incumbent upon you for a variety of reasons that you submit your self-study and other required applications by September 30th so that we can go ahead and process that information and begin scheduling all of the work that needs to occur in advance of a team visit in 2017. Secondly, you will be receiving shortly enhanced guidance and instructions for submitting the 2016 Campus Accountability Report data, which is due by November 1st. And you will see in those enhanced guidance and instructions greater specificity about the expectations of what that data needs to show, and the data integrity tests that will be applied to those CAR submittals as a routine part of how the Council reviews that information. It's also important in next steps that you please keep current on your remittances, particularly as it relates to user fees. A lot of institutions have been through various types of accreditation reviews in the last 3 months. Those generate user fees and remittance and invoices. We ask you that it's important that you keep current on making those remittances. And then finally, you can anticipate that yet this month you will be receiving your 2016 invoices for sustaining fees. And again, the information you receive will be specific about the interval for making that remittance and the process we're going to use for aging out any remittances that are overdue, and the actions we will need to take in order to intervene with those institutions and encourage them to get up to date with those remittances. This is where we become a little more considerations, where we become a little more philosophical, but I think it's important to just reiterate that, number one, we have many steps. ACICS has many steps to take yet to resolve its recognition issues with the department. In the meantime, whether that takes another 3 months or another 3 years, for our member institutions, maintaining accreditation in good standing remains valuable to member institutions for a variety of reasons, not the least of which it demonstrates your commitment to operate in a manner that involves the review by an independent third party of your quality and your integrity in order to protect the interests of students. So we all have that common understanding. This is about constantly having the ability to look out for the best interests of students, and that commitment involves maintaining accreditation in good standing. This is not a time to allow that to lapse for a variety of reasons. You should also know that we have made outreach to a variety of state approval authorities and the other national accreditors to ascertain where they're at in this process, answer their questions, and offer an enhanced degree of communications with both state approval authorities and the other national accreditors. So when there is need to exchange information, either hypothetical or based on actual factual occurrences, we can do that in a timely way and make sure that that information exchange is as factual and empirical as possible and not speculative. And I think that those bullet points, particularly that last bullet point, is probably seems to be the obvious, but what is not obvious here, but I think is implied that everybody needs to take into consideration, is that we are in a uncharted territory. So our ability to rely on prior precedent or prior encounters with this type of situation and make sure that nothing drops between the cracks, that those communications and handoffs are smooth, that has to happen as a result of direct initiative on behalf of ACICS, the other national accreditors, and our state approval authorities, as well as our oversight partners of the Department of Education. There is no established protocol that says what to communicate, when to communicate, how to communicate. So we're having to initiate that and make sure that those communications occur on a regular basis, effectively, accurately, and in a timely way. That's really it in terms of the presentation. I do want to just reiterate, though, from a narrative perspective, a couple of observations about this whole process. You know, ACICS's recognition, again, it continues in place throughout the administrative process of the Department of Education, the recognition process of the Department of Education, until the Secretary of Education makes a final decision about our recognition status, assuming that ACICS follows the process of making a timely appeal. And please assume that we will do that if it is necessary. Again, we do not have a senior department official letter at this point. Don't know when we will get it. At that point in time, when we get the letters, when we will make the decision about following the process of making a timely appeal to the Secretary. But during that entire period of time, our recognition remains in place. Therefore, the other factors that are attached to recognition, including the status of our institution's accreditation, the status of their Title IV eligibility, should also remain intact. What we can't predict is, will certain states decide that upon the receipt of an adverse senior department official, they choose to treat the accreditation status of ACICS member schools differently? We have no ability to predict that, nor do we have any intelligence to indicate that might happen. It's important for us to continue to reach out to the state approval authorities to make sure they understand our recognition remains intact all the way through the appellate process, the appeals process, to the Secretary of Education. Also, as to what happens after the Secretary of Education makes a ruling, and when it'll happen, and what the status of ACICS will be, assuming we have to get to that stage. And again, that's not an assumption we can make at this point. We will make that determination if there's need for a judicial appeal of a decision by the Secretary, if and when we get to that stage. Our sincere hope is that that is not required. Our sincere hope is that long before we get to that stage, the department will acknowledge that ACICS deserves the opportunity to demonstrate the ability to come into compliance within 1 year of the remaining deficiencies that the department has analyzed. But assuming that it gets to that point and we do have to seek a judicial review, then the status of our accreditation and recognition and those other factors have to do with what kind of injunctive relief we can get from the courts. And at this point, of course, we would pursue injunctive relief that would preserve our recognition. But until that occurs and we have that court decision in hand, anything beyond that would be speculative at this point. But that is our intent. Those are the options open to us. But that is really, going beyond that would really require us to speculate on what a court might or might not rule about a request for injunctive relief that we haven't even created at this point. So, and again, assuming that injunctive relief is granted, accreditation, recognition would remain intact, and the accreditation of member institutions would remain intact. How the other oversight partners choose to interpret that intact status is uncharted water for us. We're hoping that they will be cooperative and allow our institutions the consideration of remaining in good standing for those other purposes. But that is, again, a degree of uncertainty for which we don't have a positive affirmative answer at this point. So with that, I think we will go ahead and use the next 30 minutes. We've got 30 minutes to answer questions, and I know we've got a lot of them teed up already. Some of these, I believe, are very duplicative of the very good questions we received earlier this week from the SurveyMonkey. So let me just start from the beginning. We have a question. Is the response public, the response to the National Advisory Committee? In other words, the amended record information that we provided on July 5th, is that available to the public? Not yet. When and how it might be made available to the public, that's really up to the department. We'll leave that in their hands. I believe at some point it will, of course, become part of the public record, but I simply don't know if and when, under what circumstances, they'll become public. It involved a lot of narrative and many exhibits that we believe are represent additional evidence that ACICS has the ability and the capacity to come in compliance within 12 months on the remaining residual findings. I'm going to skip the next one. What is the average time frame for the submittal for substantive and non-substantive application processing? We aspire to a 30-day turnaround. That interval has slipped in recent months, but we're trying to work the backlog and get it back within an average of about 45 days. We have the capacity to do that, and we understand our institutions need a timely turnaround of those applications in order to continue their operations as usual, and more importantly, to serve the needs of students. Next question. Due to the number of schools and colleges affected, why not give the Secretary some concessions? This way he has a reason for a 1-year or 2-year probation or extension. All non-public colleges must have a 50-50 rule instead of a 90-10 rule, since they seem to be so concerned about money. Make it anything other than 90-10. Increase the completion rate from 60 to 70% with a 2-year improvement plan. Increase the placement rate from 60% to 70% with a 2-year improvement plan. Great suggestions. If we have the opportunity to socialize those types of additional enhancements to our standards with the department, those would probably be things that we'd be interested in talking to them about. However, there's been no indication from the department at this point that they are in a position to negotiate. In fact, I believe the record for the senior department official has closed, and all the evidence that she has access to in order to make a decision is currently within her purview, and there is no additional information under their regulations that they're prepared to take into consideration at this time. If that circumstance changes, however, and we have an opportunity to meet with the senior department official, which, by the way, we have requested that meeting, then these are the kinds of items that may have some merit. So I appreciate you asking that. Who should we contact if we feel the processing of our applications are not being reviewed in the average time frame? That would be Ian Haresduck, who is our lead management person in the office of the Division of Accreditation. And you can also copy me on that. We are interested in making sure that those necessary business transactions are occurring in a timely way, and to the degree that we need to close that interval, we believe we have the resources, and more importantly, we have the commitment to do that. So please be patient in that regard, but also please let us know. Where is CHIA in all this? Shouldn't they be speaking up in favor of ACICS? So one of our sources of recognition besides the department is the Council on Higher Education Accreditation. The most authoritative pronouncement from CHIA regarding our recognition status, what it means and how it has impact on other accreditors, was clearly articulated in a posting by the president of CHIA back on, I believe, June 24th or June 26th. If you go to the CHIA website and click on NACICI recognition process, up will pop their pronouncement. And in there, they're fairly explicit about what this type of recognition process means, not only for ACICS, but also what it means for other accreditors. I believe CHIA has been supportive to the degree that they can, that regardless of the merits of ACICS's performance relative to the department's requirements, that ACICS has demonstrated a capacity and a willingness to remedy any additional deficiencies, and on that basis should be afforded the customary interval for a compliance report. What might be expected beyond that from CHIA at this point, I'm not really sure. I could tell you, but believe me, we are in regular contact with the staff and the hierarchy at CHIA. We owe them a compliance report early this fall. We will be back in front of the CHIA board in November, and they have indicated they will make an independent determination about the extension of our recognition by CHIA, notwithstanding whatever circumstance we're confronting with the department at that particular point in time. So that's a very good question. There's a question, will everyone be able to get a copy of the presentation slides? And those will be made available through our website. What is the best way to communicate with students without creating panic? So I'd start out again referring students to let them read in their own and absorb in their own time frame the link that we pointed out on the slides that is manifest on the department's website, which is fairly authoritative, matter of fact, and I think is reassuring to students that this is a lengthy process, that there are many steps yet involved, and students need to take that into consideration in making their decisions. Likewise, for students to ask students to be sophisticated enough about what each of these steps mean, what their intervals might mean, and how the change in their the value of their education derived from a member institution might be affected at each of those steps, is asking students to absorb a lot. So I think it is important, more important than ever, that institutions establish effective relationships with their students and effective communications channels, and to assure our member institutions that as we get access to information that is potentially affecting students directly, we will share that in a timely way so that that information can then be forwarded to member institutions and to their students. There's a question also about substantive and non-substantive review of changes as it relates to new program application reviews. Again, that fits under the category of normal intervals. You're entitled to expect a normal or average interval, and we are committed to delivering on that. And that includes applications for new programs. And it also includes, of course, the processing of applications for renewal grants. Next question. We don't have a fall site visit date for reaccreditation. When should we expect to receive a site visit date? So the scheduling for the subsequent accreditation cycle usually occurs in the 2 to 3 weeks following the previous council meeting. In this case, the August council meeting is August 1 through 5. I believe that as soon as the 8th of August, institutions who are scheduled for a renewal grant visit in the fall of 2016 will start receiving communiques from ACICS staff, from coordinators and other members of our management team, asking the school to identify or to pick or will be assigned a specific date when the team will be making their presence known. So we're not it's not too early to ask that question, but typically that process begins after the council meeting. Another question. Can ACICS be talking to the Secretary of Education directly now, and what can be done to avoid denial? I think we will, it's a good question, and I think we will have to exhaust our efforts to gain access to the Secretary of Education, but I believe the time to do that will be after there is a decision letter from the senior department official. I think just following the normal protocol of the decision-making by the department, plus protecting the integrity of those steps, we also need to be judicious about when and how we make outreach to the Secretary. So we're going to abide by the normal process, and when there's an opportunity based on the department's procedures to make that outreach, thank you for the suggestion, and we will make that attempt. Next question, do you have a list of states that are taking action now? Off the top of my head, I believe I have seen requests for accreditation contingency plans from Arizona, California, Illinois, and maybe 1 or 2 other states. If you have not received such a request from your state, then perhaps you will not be getting one. At the same time, maybe some of the states have been a little bit slower to follow that suggestion, and I can't tell you exactly where the suggestion came from, and may decide not to require it. So, but I would ask you this: as a member institution, if you receive that request and you have any questions about how to fulfill that request, based on information that you can only get from ACICS, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I've been fielding those phone calls and emails for the last several days. That will continue to be a big part of our communications protocol, because in many cases, the answers to those have to be customized based on the state and based on the institution. It is not a one-size-fits-all proposition. Next question. Confirming that if our accreditation is scheduled for December 2017, in other words, the accreditation grant expires December 31st, 2017, the self-study is due by September 30th, 2016. Yes, that is true. That should be reflected in our criteria and the materials on our website. If you're getting any conflicting deadlines in that regard, please let us know. Next question. This one is a little speculative, but it's fine. In 2015, did ACICS suspect that was under some sort of observation by either the Secretary of Education, the Department of Education, or enforcement officers of various state governments. So the Department of Education, including the Title IV divisions for which you all have relationships based on your participation in Title IV, as well as the accrediting division of the department, which is a totally separate division from that which deals with Title IV, as well as the state approval authorities, as well as in some cases state attorneys general. We consider all of those, and our other national and regional accreditors, by the way, we consider all of those to be oversight partners. So the degree to which in any given month or year we receive information from them or requests for information from them regarding the quality or integrity of our member institutions, we are in a very routine and methodical way responding and participating in those information requests on a recurring basis. To specifically answer this question, did we have some reason to believe that either the intensity or the content of those requests for information was suddenly going to rise to the level that it would be that those issues would be cited repeatedly in the department's analysis of our recognition petition? The answer is no. But to the degree the department decided to make that part of their findings, we are dealing with it. We're doing our best to address those issues and make reforms in our policies and procedures so that if and when we are receiving information from any of those oversight partners that causes us to assess risk associated with a member's program or institution, that information is more robustly integrated into the evaluation process. That can only strengthen the job that we're doing on behalf of students and on behalf of member institutions. I hope that helps with that question, but beyond that, I'm not really sure what to tell y'all. Next question. What support do you want from ACICS institutions to the Department of Education? I can tell you that spontaneously, many of our institutions, and I got to tell you from a personal perspective, it's very gratifying to get these kinds of questions, these kinds of inquiries, and to also have spontaneously received from many of our member institutions, strictly on an FYI basis. This is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. We are reaching out to our congressional delegations or to the Secretary of Education or both to respectfully and sincerely request that there be consideration of ACICS having the courtesy, the extension of 1 year to submit a compliance report so that it can demonstrate that it is operating according to the department's expectations. And while we do not and cannot encourage or discourage that activity, really have nothing to say about it, it is up to the institutions themselves if they feel so obliged. It is certainly within their right. And do I think it deteriorates or diminishes the case that we have put on the record with the department? I don't really believe so. But again, that any outreach of that regard should be respectful and should be informative. That is always, I think, input that is valued by individuals and groups of individuals within the federal government that have legitimately a very difficult decision to make. Let's see. How do we initiate a voluntary withdrawal of accreditation? I would be remiss if I didn't indicate to you that we have had a few inquiries in that regard since the Nasiki hearing on June 23rd. It has not, however, I would also point out to you, has not been a flood or a stampede. It has been a few inquiries. The answer is fairly simple. You go into our criteria and look at the information, the standards that apply to voluntary withdrawal of accreditation, and it simply really involves you writing a letter to the executive indicating your intent to withdraw accreditation or to not seek reaccreditation if in fact that is your intent, and we will and establish, of course, the date of that, and we will in writing acknowledge receipt of that letter. I think it's important, though, as institutions consider, do we or do we not notify ACICS of our intent to withdraw or to not seek reaccreditation. But it's really important to emphasize that you want to make sure your accreditation is intact up until the time, if necessary, that we seek injunctive relief through the courts, and the time, assuming that injunctive relief is granted, through the time that we litigate that. And even at that point, if the court decides on behalf of ACICS, the decision will be to remand back, we believe, to the department the decision, the denial decision, and grant us the 12 months to come into compliance. It will not be a ruling on the merits of the findings. So we still have to move forward every month, every accrediting cycle, assuming that we will be ultimately afforded the opportunity of compliance report, and at that point, and at the point in time we submit that compliance report, there has to be a high degree of evidence that we have complied or exceeded the department's expectations on every one of those findings. So to us, that's the key focus right now, and we want to make sure that we do everything possible to preserve our recognition until that outcome is manifest, so that our institutions don't have to worry about a lapse in accreditation, or more importantly, having to make difficult decisions about seeking alternate sources of accreditation, unless in the final analysis, based on all of the factors they're reviewing for their business, that is the decision they make. But I think in terms of, again, notifying the council of their intent to withdraw, it is simply a matter of writing the letter, and then we will follow up in that regard. So we're about, we have about 12 minutes left. I'll take a couple more. Here's a good question. Playing out worst case scenarios, what kind of transition conversations have you had with other national accreditors about fast tracking the process to help institutions? The answer is we have had transition conversations with other national accreditors. We have not had conversations about fast tracking the process. I think it's too preliminary to talk about accelerating the process. I think instead what our discussion has been is, do we, number one, all have a common understanding of what ACICS's recognition status is at this point, what it means and what it doesn't mean. Number two, do we have effective channels of communication open that are operating effectively, that afford us the opportunity to, on a timely basis, catch up with each other, trade information or exchange information about member institutions, and make sure that if in fact another accreditor is ultimately considering an ACICS institution for accreditation, that other accreditor has all the information from us they need in order to make an informed decision, including whether or not to ultimately process that request for accreditation for an initial grant of accreditation. That's about the best I can tell you right now. In terms of accelerating the process, I think it's premature to even speculate on the degree to which that interval would have to be shortened, let alone when that shortened interval would have to become operative. Those are worthy considerations, but we're not prepared at this point to do anything speculative in that regard. But thank you for asking the question. If the department allows ACICS to come into compliance within a year and recognition of ACICS as an accreditor remains intact, I thought I heard you say the same is true through the appeal process if that becomes necessary, but then mention injunctive relief. Is the status of ACICS intact only with injunctive relief through the appeal process? If ED allows ACICS to come into compliance within a year, recognition of ACICS as an accreditor remains intact. I thought I heard you say the same is true. Okay, so this is repeated. Is the status of ACICS intact only with injunctive relief through the appeal process? The answer to that, I believe, is yes. It will require injunctive relief through the judicial appeal process in order for ACICS's recognition to remain intact. But of course, that is exactly the essence of the injunctive relief we would seek. The other part of the question is also important, and I want to re-emphasize it, and that is, in the event ACICS is afforded the opportunity to submit a compliance report, what are our plans? Our plans are, beginning with the spring 2016, the current accreditation cycle, which culminates with deliberations in front of the council the first week in August, followed by enhancements and revisions and strengthening those procedures and policies with the fall 2016 cycle, that cycle which begins in September, and then followed by additional enhancements and revisions and improvements that will occur during the winter 2017 cycle, that will give us at least, we believe, 3 full cycles of reforms and enhancements and revisions that are responsive to the specific deficiencies identified in the department's findings. And that is not only the focus of my colleagues here at ACICS, the focus of our 15-member council board of directors, and it also needs to be the focus of all of our member institutions. In some cases, and in many cases, I believe the application of those strengthened standards and additional procedures of review will produce some additional anxiety and additional findings for member institutions. But we need your cooperation and collaboration, that going through that process is in the best interest of your students. It's also in the best interest of ACICS retaining its recognition and therefore your valid accreditation through the Department of Education. What are you going to do? State of California, how to make the state of California understand the status of ACICS accreditation. So I know we have 60, maybe 65 institutions in California. We have engaged in outreach with the Bureau, with the leadership at the Bureau. We're exchanging emails, exchanging phone calls, sending additional information. They will, for example, receive this slide deck. I understand they're also doing a webinar today, and I will be able to receive a copy of that slide deck and also review if there are any issues that arise out of that information from the Bureau that needs follow-up with our member institutions in California. We're being vigilant about that. I want to make sure people understand there is no indication of ill intent on anybody's part. Everybody's doing their best with a great deal of unknowns to try to interpret, both for their schools, for their state approval authorities, and for their students, what our recognition status means and what it doesn't mean. And the only way we're going to get it right is to continue to have a series of very specific exchanges on an ongoing basis, so that what you're hearing from your state approval authority is a much closer match to what you're hearing from your accreditor, which is a much closer match, hopefully, with what you're hearing from the Title IV folks, and a combination of all three. But because this is uncharted territory, there is a lot of ambiguity here, and it's in that ambiguity that there is flexibility in interpreting things, and then institutions walk away with maybe conflicting bits of information. So I just ask that you be patient in that regard, and if you're not confident that you received an authoritative and conclusive opinion from one source of oversight, don't hesitate to ask another source of oversight and then compare the notes and see, are they reasonably close together? And then you have the basis of information that you can use to make informed business decisions. Let's see, let's keep going. We have a little more time here. Since this action is unprecedented, how can ACICS help schools get consideration with state recognition? I think that's another way to ask a previously asked question, but among other things, we have made outreach to the National Association of State Supervisors, and we will be scheduling a webinar with them very shortly, where we will go through a lot of the same information we're sharing with you all and give those state approval authority officials the opportunity to ask questions of ACICS so that they have not only an interpretation of our status from the Department of Education, but they also have an authoritative interpretation of our status from ACICS, and we know we need to do that. The National Association has agreed to collaborate with us in making that outreach, and once that happens, I think the information that institutions will be receiving will even be a closer match with what you're hearing from ACICS today. Let me see if there's another question. So will audio of the webinar be available, especially the Q&A session? And the answer is we can make that available through our website. Here's another one. If ACICS is permitted to submit a compliance report and DOE still feels that ACICS is not in compliance, what happens then? I don't even want to consider what that might be like, but I believe that we would have to, at that point, really make some serious decisions about under what circumstance we could continue to seek recognition by the department. The answer to that question is, more importantly, we need to be sure as an agency that our compliance report fully fulfills all of those requirements, and any other contingency to plan for it that at this point, from my perspective, is more of a distraction than a help. I understand that's not helpful to the institutions, but I think the other thing you should be noted and recognized is that even though we highly value our partnership with the Department of Education and we highly value the fact that we are oversight partners and that we are currently a Title IV gatekeeper, we have a fairly substantial number of institutions that we accredit that do not even participate now in Title IV in federal student aid, and they rely on us in any event to continue to provide them quality assurance services, and we plan to continue to do that. So if that contingency arises, will it mean the shape and the configuration of ACICS is substantially different than what it is today? Perhaps. But the loss of Title IV gatekeeping role is not in and of itself determinative of the fate of ACICS. It is only an important factor that needs to be considered. So I hope folks understand that. We view it as a very important factor. We view it as a very critical factor. But in any event, there is a will and there's a determination by the council, by the staff, and by many of our member institutions to continue this relationship in any regard. And we take heart in that. Let me see if there's any other up there that I should. We have a nursing program. How does ACICS status affect our licensing board? One of the things that we need to do sooner rather than later, both in order to comply with the expectations of the department as well as to fortify our own review of student achievement as it relates to licensure and certification, is to establish a much more robust, comprehensive set of relationships with state nursing and licensure boards. That process is underway, and the first manifestation you will see of that is if you have a licensure certification program and you submit that data in the 2016 CAR, anticipate that that data that you submit will be checked against the certification or licensure data that's available from the State Licensure Board, as well as any other information about your program status with that State Licensure Board. And that information will be used by the Council in making an informed accrediting decision about the status of that particular allied health program. That is a substantial enhancement to our consideration and review of those types of programs, but it is necessary and it is coming. It is imminent. We've reached the 3 o'clock window, and I know a lot of you probably have questions that are yet to be answered, but I think we're starting to get into some redundancy. What I will commit to you to today is, if you have additional questions that you feel have not been answered, please feel free to email them to me or to Ian Haresduck, and we will process those and respond to them either individually through phone calls, or if we have to establish a follow-up webinar, we will do that as well. In the meantime, as our circumstance changes, or as we have additional updates that are meaningful updates that are based on empirical information, not speculation, anticipate you will be receiving some additional email blasts, constant contact blasts, that will give you that information and will let you know if a follow-up webinar will also be provided. If you all have additional ideas or suggestions about to enhance the communications process, we're all open to that as well. With that, I'd like to say thank you for attending this important webinar. We appreciate the opportunity to exchange perspectives with you all and hope that this helps you make some considerations and planning for the ongoing accreditation of your institution. Thank you very much.